Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Gello, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor here at First Light Psychological Services. And today I'm going to be discussing the monologue of the mind, otherwise known as your inner dialogue. Most people have this inner dialogue that narrates all of our thoughts and puts words to our feelings and emotions. More often than not, the voice in your head is going to sound like your real voice, but sometimes we hear other people's voices too, either within a memory or maybe thinking about what somebody would say in that moment. Sometimes we are aware of the voice in our head, and sometimes we're not. I would like to start, though, by talking about what is known as the cognitive triangle. So this is simply the connection between your thoughts, your feelings and emotions, and your behavior, which would be the action or actions that you take in response to a situation. What you think certainly affects how you feel and act in response to whatever it is that you're going through in that given moment, but how you feel can also affect what you think and do, and what you do can affect how you think and feel. So it kind of reminds me of that notorious question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Except in this case, it's which came first, the thought, feeling, or action. All three are interchangeable, and that's why it's important to understand this connection. The thoughts that you have are all based on how you are perceiving things in the world around you and what sort of significance there is to those things. So this all stems really from the five senses. The input that you're getting is all from our senses. It's triggering the thoughts, the feelings, and behavior. Now, the feelings you experience stem from your emotions. So if you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, then you know that there are five core emotions, which would be joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. They can all be experienced by themselves, or there can be a combination of emotions occurring at the same time. Now, these emotions can be all toward one thing or multiple situations. Now, the spectrum of emotions is so vast, it can lead to an infinite number of thoughts and actions. Sometimes you might even find yourself acting before thinking. This does happen, but maybe you just didn't realize that you were thinking. Allow me to explain this further. So there are three levels of human consciousness. We have your conscious thoughts, subconscious thoughts, and unconscious thoughts. So I'm going to start with the conscious. When you are experiencing conscious thoughts, it refers to your immediate awareness of a situation at any moment in time. For example, you are conscious of the fact that you are watching this webinar right now. So conscious thoughts are a constant, and they occur based on the information that you obtain, again, through those five senses. You will have all types of thoughts and sensations based on how you perceive what's going on in your environment. You also may experience memory recall if you see something that reminds you of a particular time in the recent or distant past. So this would also be a conscious thought, because even though it's something from the past, you are thinking about it in the present moment. So whatever the thoughts may be, you process and analyze the information, and then it really gets put to use when active decisions are being made as a result. Now, the second level of consciousness is the subconscious. So as you experience things throughout your life, it gets stored in your mind. Imagine your mind is like a warehouse. Everything that you've ever experienced, everything that's ever made an impression on you or changed your perspective in the slightest, anything that you've had feelings and emotions towards, and anything that reinforces these impressions and how you respond to them, all of this goes into that mental warehouse. So this mental storage unit is also considered the pre-conscious. So those two terms are interchangeable. This is not something you may always be immediately aware of. It really actually isn't even possible, considering how much is in there. You couldn't possibly consciously have all those things on your mind at one time. But regardless, the point is that it's always there. As a result of this, patterns of thought and behavior that previously developed will continue to occur. When we autopilot, such as driving home without realizing how we got there, it's because of your subconscious mind. You've learned something and it has been repeated to the point that it has become a habit. So when you autopilot home, you're obviously aware, you're consciously aware that you're driving home and you know that you're going home when you get in the car, but you don't need to focus on that once you start driving. You already know how to get home, so you just do it. Your subconscious thoughts are actively working to do this, and you may also have other conscious thoughts going on, like the music that you're listening to at the time. Maybe you're on the phone with somebody, or maybe you're just recapping events from the day, and that's what's immediately on your mind. So the subconscious is also filled with suppressed thoughts. Suppression is when you consciously try to bury painful or unwanted thoughts. It can include any kind of anxiety-provoking thoughts, memories, emotions, fantasies, desires, the list goes on. But you're purposely doing this in order to return to a state of comfort. So essentially, it's compartmentalization. And compartmentalization is basically when you take something in your mind and you put it in a box and put it away, mentally put it in a box, and put it on a shelf, and you tell yourself, I'm going to deal with that later. So sometimes this is actually appropriate and healthy. For example, if you have a fight at home with your significant other and it's right before you're on your way to work, well, when you get to work, you're going to want to, just flip that switch, turn off what you were feeling from that fight with your significant other, because now you're at work. You have to focus on work. You tell yourself, you know what? I'm here, I'm at work now. That's what my focus is and my priority is. So I'll deal with that later. And the same thing can happen if maybe you had a stressful day at work. So now you're going home and you don't want to bring that workplace stress and tension into your home life. So same thing. You leave work at work because now you're going home to spend time with, whoever is there, maybe just yourself, but that time is meant for you, not work. So again, it's like a light switch. You're just turning it off. You tell yourself, I'll deal with it later. So again, there is a time and place to deal with things. So there is healthy and unhealthy compartmentalization. It's healthy when it's temporary. Everybody needs a break. So if you're dealing with, again, a fight with a significant other and you decide, you know what, I'm going to compartmentalize this even for 10 minutes. I need to put it out of sight, out of mind, maybe go in the other room, put some music on, and just deal with it after. So again, if you need 10 minutes, it could be 10 hours, it could be 10 days. But as long as you're going back and addressing it, and you have to really know what is the limit with that, because if you go too far with compartmentalization, it becomes unhealthy. And that's when you're not going back to it. So if you're taking a break and you tell yourself, oh, I'll go back to this later, I just need a break. And then when the time comes for you to go back to it and you tell yourself, I'm not really quite ready yet, I need more time. That might be true. You might need more time and that's okay. But again, when is it too much? Like now maybe days have gone by and weeks have gone by, months, years even. Now, when are you going to go back to it? Because the longer you avoid it, the harder it is to go back to it. And sometimes people just don't want to deal with whatever it is, so they don't go back to it at all. And now the final level of consciousness is the unconscious. This is the deepest level, and it makes up, it's made up of tons of thoughts, memories, and other instinctual desires that are buried way, way below the conscious awareness. So even though we're not aware of their existence, they're still there, and they can still have a very, very significant influence and impact on our behavior. So when you experience something negative in your life or a traumatic event, it may be so upsetting that you try to forget it. This is different from suppression because repression involves the unconscious mind. Repressed thoughts and memories often center around sexual or aggressive urges, or maybe painful memories that were experienced during childhood. It really could be a number of things. But when the experience is so painful to the point that it's unbearable, your brain will literally, instinctually try to block you from having to experience it. This is a defense mechanism, and it's all in effort to maintain your mental stability. So repressed memories resurface through intensive trauma therapy, or sometimes they resurface unexpectedly when a person is exposed to a trigger, something that's similar to the past situation. Again, you may not realize that that's what's going on because you have literally forgotten the memory, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen and that that memory isn't there. It's just stored in the deepest part of that mental warehouse. So the best way that I've seen it described, those three levels of consciousness, is like an iceberg. And it floats in the water, and the majority of the iceberg remains below the surface. You can't see it. There's a very small percentage of it that is still visible above the surface. And the largest part of it, the most influential part of it, is unseen. Now, in the same way, each of us will have a part of ourselves that we reveal to others, with the larger part of ourselves being deeply submerged that no one ever gets to see. Now that we've covered the three levels of human consciousness, I want you to ponder this. Have you ever felt like you've just gone from 0 to 100, for seemingly no reason? Or maybe you noticed that somebody else acted out of nowhere. It was just so abrupt. Nobody saw it coming, not even the person who did it. Well, there's never no reason. There's always a reason. There's the saying that people can act without thinking, but technically that just means conscious thinking. So when you act out for no reason, you just aren't realizing the reason, especially in the moment, because the subconscious or unconscious mind has been triggered by the immediate situation. If this happens repeatedly or often enough that it's noticed and it's having a significant impact, then it may be because of that unhealthy compartmentalization. Some things haven't been dealt with, or at least not adequately enough, and your tolerance is going down, so the risk of acting out is going up now. When a person acts out, they may experience several types of common thoughts in response to a number of common triggers. So I have a list here of triggers that I want to go through, just common examples. So, for example, being teased, being let down, being criticized, maybe somebody's making fun of you, name calling. You feel that somebody's looking down at you. Maybe somebody's speaking very demeaning to you. So it could tie in with feeling disrespected, maybe rejected, being lied to, feeling betrayed. Maybe somebody's yelling at you or cursing at you, making demands of you. If you feel trapped, interrupted by somebody, threatened, maybe you've lost something. I mean, the list is so vast, but these are just examples of things that do trigger people to act out. So with that being said, back to those types of thoughts, there's, I would say, three really common ones. So now the first one is considered to be pressure thoughts. So this would consist of things like I or you. So I have to do this. You must do that. You had better do this. I need this. You're supposed to. I should. You know, again, it's putting pressure on either yourself or others to be doing something. So you got to be really mindful of this too, because if you're putting too much pressure on yourself, you could act out. You might feel that pressure building and then you snap. And same with another person. If you put too much pressure on another person, they could reach a breaking point too. So those are pressure thoughts. So the second type I want you to think about is if you've ever had angry thoughts or even just stressful thoughts. So these might present in ways like, oh, this is happening again. This is horrible. This sucks. This is so effed up. I can't believe this is happening again. I'm pissed off now. I'm angry. I'm going to go off. This is BS. You know, it could be directed at a situation. It could be directed at a person. But either way, it's thoughts that are revolving around the stress and the anger toward whatever the situation is. And the final type of thought that's also very common is self-defeating thoughts. So this might present like, I can't do this. I won't do this. I won't be good enough. It's no use. Nobody cares. Why do I even bother? There's no point. What's the point? There's none. Everything I do is bad. I'm a nobody. Again, anything surrounding self-defeating. So this, of course, is very much aimed at the self. So while these are all common thoughts, you can still have multiple of these at the same time. So let's say you're under a lot of pressure at work. You might be thinking, oh, I need to get this done. I have to get this done. You know, you might be thinking, if I don't, I could get in trouble. I could lose my job. And then you might be thinking, well, that's not fair. Why is there so much pressure on me? You know, maybe my coworkers should be helping, or my boss should give me less work to do. I need a break. I want a break. And this is effed up. This is BS. You know, I deserve a break. And then maybe it's revolving around a more dominant thought. Because again, you could experience all three of these. It's kind of like a domino effect. It might start with one and then it jumps to another and back to another. But you might notice a pattern that some of these thoughts are more dominant. So if you were to be experiencing pressure thoughts more frequently, then maybe there's a control issue going on there. Or if you're experiencing mostly angry or stressful thoughts, either in general or toward a specific situation, then maybe you need to work on distress tolerance or anger management. And if you're having a lot of self-defeating thoughts, if that's the primary thing that keeps reoccurring, then maybe you need to work on self-esteem. So the types of thoughts that you have can be very telling. And if you identify them, it'll give you a better sense of direction of what you need to be working on. So the tough part is about this is, now again, people don't always realize the thoughts they're having. And if you're having a lot of thoughts, it's really hard to pinpoint specific ones, especially even more so when you're in the heat of the moment. Think about when you're really angry and you're like in a rage and you just, you can't think anymore. You just feel like you're going crazy. Well, you're not really going to stop and think. You know, people don't really gravitate toward, well, let me figure out what I'm thinking right now. It's kind of hard to do when the emotions are so overwhelming. And that's why it might seem like a person is acting without thinking first, because they might notice the feeling. And because of that feeling, if it's not unbearable enough, they react because they reach that threshold. Everybody has a breaking point. So you have these feelings in response to a situation, you act out, and then maybe after the fact, you start to reflect and realize, oh, this happened. So again, that's where those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can be interchangeable. So how do you identify your thoughts then? Well, your body is also trying to tell you that something's not okay. And it can tell you and guide you to better identify your thoughts. So basically, when you have a response to a situation, it's mind and body. So your cognitive response, which again would be all those types of thoughts, and then your physiological response, which would be how your body is reacting. So that's going to be broken into an internal body response and an external body response. So internally, you might be feeling things like your muscles are tensing up. Maybe you notice that your heart's pounding, or you feel like you're choking because you're just so anxious. You might have a lump, that's the sensation of a lump in your throat. Maybe you feel dizzy, or you feel butterflies in your stomach, like you're feeling those knots, that nervous sensation. You might experience headaches. You could have that kind of numb feeling, or maybe you have no energy, all the things that you feel internally. Whereas the external physiological responses are going to be the things that other people can see, how you're presenting. So this could be that your face is getting very red. Maybe you're sweating. Maybe people notice that your fists are clenched. You could be shaking. I'm trying to think of some other ones. You might have like fidgeting, like you can't sit still. Maybe you're tapping your leg, or you're just kind of fumbling with your hands. You could be twitching. All these things are going to be how you appear on the surface. So these things can vary depending on the situation, but again, these are your body responses. So if you start to notice, if you're in a situation and all of a sudden you feel very warm and you feel your chest tighten up, and you notice that you're sweating and maybe you're clenching your fists, well, that's a pretty good indicator that something's going on there. Your body is trying to tell you, I'm not okay. I'm experiencing a reaction to something, and it's trying to get your attention. So when you notice those sensations, that's your cue. Your body is cueing you to stop and think about what it is that's going on. You have to bring your attention to your thoughts. So a good way to do this is if you picture a stop sign. All right, we're going to use this acronym here. So when you notice your body having these sensations, what you're going to do is you're going to stop. Picture that stop sign. You're not going to do anything. You're just going to pause. And now you're going to think. What's going on in your mind? What kind of thoughts are you having? If you can't pinpoint them, then can you pinpoint how you're feeling? Again, think about what kind of body response you're having, because again, that can help guide you. So you're stopping, you're thinking. The third part, the O, is observing. What's going on around you? What may have caused you to feel this way? What is present in your environment? And the P in stop is proceed. Because now that you've stopped and you've checked in with yourself, you allow yourself that moment to stop and process things and get a better idea of what you should do in response. So it's helping you to stop before you act. So now the tough part again with thoughts is that people also have what is known as thinking errors. So even if you notice your thoughts and you pinpoint them, they might be distorted, and this can misguide you. So cognitive distortions is the formal term for them, but they're, again, otherwise known as thinking errors. So I have a list of common thinking errors. Unfortunately, there is an extremely, extremely long list of them, but it really would be impossible to cover all of them. So I'm just going to go through some of the more common ones. And I will, if you look on the webinar, there's an attachment that includes this list. That way you have it for reference as well. So the first one is known as magnification. So this would be where you're exaggerating your response to something. This is where you might appear to be overreacting to a situation. Whereas the opposite can happen where you're minimizing a situation. So let's say that you drop a dish, you accidentally knock your dish off the table and it breaks. You might be like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever. I can't believe this dish broke. Now this is a terrible day. Well, a dish broke. Is it unfortunate? Yes. Is it upsetting? Definitely. It definitely can be. But is that response appropriate to the situation? You might be making it into a bigger deal than it actually is. Now, the inverse can happen too, where you might minimize the situation. So an example of this could be, let's say you go out with friends, you have some drinks, and you think, well, I didn't have that much to drink, and I'll be fine. I can drive. So let's say you drive drunk or you drive intoxicated and you get home, you might minimize the severity of it thinking, well, I didn't get into an accident, nobody got hurt, so it's fine. But you're minimizing the situation. That could have been potentially dangerous. So if you start to reinforce those thinking errors, you might continue to make poor decisions because of it. You're enabling yourself to minimize situations. Now, beyond this, going back to magnification, if you magnify things to a point where you feel like it's the end of the world and you only see these negative outcomes, these worst possible outcomes of a situation, this is known as catastrophizing. You only are seeing the negative. So an example of this would be, let's say you get into trouble, right? You get arrested for something. It's the best example I can think of in the moment. But let's say you get arrested. In that moment, you might be thinking, oh my God, my life is over. That's it. It's done. What's the point in going on? I have nothing left now because I'm going to jail or whatever it is. And that might not even be the case. And even if that is the case, is your life really over? You might be taking things to a point that it's not even going to get to. So that leads me into my next one, which is there's two parts to this one. And this is the thinking error of jumping to conclusions. So you're interpreting the meaning of a situation without any or maybe very little evidence that that's really the case. So this presents in two ways. The first way that it presents is mind reading. So you might be thinking that the person in front of you, or whatever the situation is, that the thoughts and beliefs of others are centering around something. And again, you don't have evidence for that. So an example of this would be, let's say you get home from work and your significant other is sitting on the couch and they look really mad. And you're like, well, whoa, what's going on there? Why are they mad? Oh, did I do something? Oh my gosh, it must have been, from this, I forgot to do this task that I said I was going to do. They're definitely mad at me. I should just, maybe I should leave. I should go now. Should I say something? You're already jumping to conclusions because you're mind reading what that person is thinking. What if your significant other just had a bad day at work? It might not have anything to do with you, but you're mind reading. Or maybe somebody looks at you and they, maybe look you up and down and you think, what's their problem? They're judging me. They don't like me. They must be looking at this. Maybe it's my hair. Is it something I'm wearing? You're mind reading. You don't know what that person's thinking. They didn't say anything. You're making an assumption based on how they present. So the second part of jumping to conclusions is fortune telling. This is another really common one. This is where people predict what the outcomes of a situation will be. So unfortunately, it often centers around a situation turning out badly, but it does happen. We do try to make predictions about things that could be positive too. So again, it's all kind of centered around expectations a bit. So you have to be careful of that as well, because what happens when things don't go to plan, then there's disappointment and nobody wants to feel that. So you're kind of setting yourself up for, mental failure in that sense. If you're mind reading and fortune telling, jumping to any conclusions, it's not healthy. So another thinking error is personalization. So this is where you take things personally. So if somebody, going back to the example I gave before with the angry significant other, if you see that this person in front of you, and again, it could be anybody, we could use another example, use a boss. Let's say you go to work and your boss is, stomping around, they seem really mad. You might think, uh-oh, it's me. I did something. It was my fault that they're mad. You're taking the situation personal. You're taking their emotions personal. And maybe, again, they're just having a bad day. So you might notice overlap here, right? Because there's a little bit of mind reading. You might be thinking, oh, they're mad at me. They might be thinking that I'm not a good employee. And it's because of how they're feeling right now, the way they're presenting. Again, body reaction. They might see, oh, my boss, their brows are furrowed and their hands are tensed up, so they look mad. You can make that connection. So you're interpreting your boss's outward presentation as something that you did wrong, and now you're trying to figure out what it is that they're thinking. So there really can be a lot of overlap with these thinking errors, and you might notice that as I keep talking about this, as I go down this list. So the next one that I want to quickly cover is emotional reasoning. This is probably, in my opinion, one of the most significant thinking errors that a person can have, because it's all about this assumption that the way you feel, the emotions that you're experiencing, reflect the way things really are. So the example on the worksheet that, again, I've attached, that document listing these cognitive distortions, says, I feel like a bad friend, therefore I must be a bad friend. But how do you know that? Who said that you were a bad friend? Are you interpreting the situation falsely? How do you know? Which I will get to that, how you can figure that out. But just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean that that's really your reality. You might feel like you're a bad employee because your boss is not in a good mood. So you might take it personal. You might be mind reading what your boss is thinking, and you're emotionally reasoning. Just because you feel like this is a bad situation or that it's about you doesn't mean that that's the case. So again, there's an example of that overlap. Another really common one is disqualifying the positive. So this is where you're focusing only on the negatives that are going around you, but you're not giving weight to any of the positives. This can be extremely, extremely devastating to a person, because what if you have a lot of positive things happen throughout your day, and then one bad thing happens, and now you're focusing on that one bad thing? That could ruin your whole day. So you might magnify that negative. So again, overlap, magnification going on there. You're magnifying those negatives and you're disqualifying all those positives. Another one on this sheet is all or nothing thinking. So this is also commonly referred to as black and white thinking. So it's all those extremes. It's now or never. It's all or nothing. It's everything or nothing. There's the saying that nothing is impossible, because sometimes people will think it's impossible. Nothing's impossible. But even then, you've got extremes going on there too. We have nothing as opposed to all or nothing, and we have impossible, which is also an extreme. You're speaking in absolutes. This also comes up where people label things as good or bad. There's only those two, and there's no gray area. So that's also very unhealthy, because in reality, there is a whole lot of gray area, more so than the extremes. Another one is overgeneralization. So this would be where either one situation or very few situations give you this impression that everything within that category is a certain way. So for example, if we think about crime, right? If you're dealing with criminals, people might think that every single criminal is bad, right? Every single one is a bad person. They're evil. There is not one criminal in this world that is good. That's an overgeneralization. And maybe that person feels that way because of their own experiences, because we might know, well, no, not every criminal is a bad person. They might have just been through some things and made some poor decisions. It could also be with cheating. We hear the expression, once a cheater, always a cheater. Look at that one. All or nothing thinking is going on right there, and overgeneralizations of a person. So you could overgeneralize a single person, a group of people. We see this a lot with politics, unfortunately. Same thing, there's those two extremes. People might think that, oh, one political party, one person's actions that aligns with a particular political party means that every single person in that political party is the same way. That's an overgeneralization. So that's another thing you have to be careful of, because it also can tie in with some of those other things. So again, a lot of overlap. The other one that I want to mention, which I already did mention it within those types of thoughts, is should statements. So again, this is the belief that things should be a certain way. So it is a pressure thought. It aligns with that type of thought, but it is its own major thinking error, because it's very, very common that people have should as that pressuring term. That key word in there is should. That things should be a certain way. And the last one I want to mention, if I pull up my list, is magical thinking. So this is the belief that certain acts will influence unrelated situations. The example here, which can be a little confusing, it says, I am a good person. Bad things shouldn't happen to me. But just because you're a good person doesn't mean that bad things won't happen to you. They're unrelated. There might be superstitions, and people do believe in karma and things like that. And while that's certainly okay to believe, you have to be careful, because sometimes a person's beliefs can be unhealthy if it gets to a point where there is a significant impact. Because unfortunately, it's a bit of a touchy subject when people hear that. They might think, oh, well, do you think that my religious or spiritual beliefs are magical thinking? And again, that's not the case. The reason that these are called thinking errors is because they're doing things to you, or rather you're engaging them, and it leads you to make negative decision making. You have poor judgment. You just have this distorted thinking, and it's having a negative impact on you. So all of these distortions are common. Everybody experiences them, myself included. I've experienced all these things on the list, and that's normal. Everybody does. It's a problem. It becomes a true thinking error when it has a significant impact on you. So again, if you notice that a certain belief that you have is having nothing but negative outcomes as a result of you engaging in those thoughts, then you kind of have to reevaluate what's going on here. Because if somebody is using religion or their spiritual beliefs to cope and it's having a positive impact on them, then that's okay. That might be something healthy for that person. So you really do have to use your best judgment. So that leads me into my final piece here is judgment. How do you figure out if you're having a thinking error? How do you pinpoint that? Well, you have to put thoughts on trial. And I have attached on the side of the webinar here, same thing. It's a worksheet that will help you to do just this. So what you do is, in this exercise, you take a thought that you have and you literally put it on trial. So think about if there's the defense attorney and you have your prosecutor and the judge. The judge is making that final determination and you are the judge. And in your mind, you have this defense and this prosecutor. It's kind of like the little devil and the angel on your shoulder. You kind of have to figure out who's saying what and which should you give more weight to. So what you do is you gather all of that evidence. You take all the pieces here to that puzzle that support each side. What do you have supporting this thought and what do you have that goes against this thought? And the evidence that you get to support either side has to be verifiable fact. And it's on that sheet. So if you complete it, highlight that, because that's the key piece. People will take a situation and be like, well, no, this person had this face. They were angry and they were walking around very mad. And I know it's because of me, because I did this. And the last time I, maybe did this behavior, it led to that same exact response from this person. They got angry the last time. But you don't have proof of that, do you? Do you have proof that that's exactly what happened here? Did this person say something? You can't just make assumptions. So gather all that evidence, as long as it's fact, and then what you do is you compare the two. And at the end, you make your judgment. You come to that conclusion and come to your verdict here. Is this thought accurate? And is it fair? Is it fair to me? Is it fair to the other person? Is it fair to the situation? You have to really weigh the evidence. So again, when you weigh the evidence, when you take those things that you have, including the thoughts that you have, how do you feel about the situation? You have to go through the list and make sure that what you're having is not a thinking error, because that will completely misguide you in how you respond to a situation. You want to make sure that you're making healthy decisions. Again, so that's why it's so important that you pay attention to your thoughts. Allow yourself to be mindful of your body if you need help identifying the thoughts, and then make sure that you're really, really judging your thoughts in a way that is true and fair. Because again, you reinforce your inner dialogue. So if you have a thought that's a constant and you consistently reinforce it with thinking errors, again, you don't have factual information, you don't have real evidence, and you continue to reinforce it, now what are you actually reinforcing? Are you reinforcing a negative belief about yourself, about somebody else? Either way, it's not going to be healthy. And those are automatic thoughts now because you've done it so many times. You've reinforced the negative so many times. It might feel like it's impossible to change your thoughts, but it is. And you are capable of it because you've already demonstrated that you're capable of it. You've demonstrated it because you have habits already. And some of those habits might be negative. Everybody always has some type of negative habit. The severity of it might vary to different extents, but there's always something there. So you have to weigh that too. But again, it's super important that you're critical about your thoughts. And it's okay if you have all of these. You might identify all of the thinking errors in a particular situation. And again, that's okay. Don't feel like there's something wrong with you, because there's nothing wrong with you. It's just a matter of figuring out, is there a pattern here? And if there is, what can I do to improve it? Because nobody likes to feel badly. And these are ways that you can reinforce the positive. And this is known as cognitive restructuring. So it's essentially thought replacement. So if you take that trial process that you just put your thought on and you realize, you know what, this thinking error is invalid. This is a thinking error. You've identified that now, that this is distorted thinking. So what do? How do you get rid of that thought? Well, you replace it. You take the real evidence that you have and you remind yourself of that. So whatever the statement is, whatever the thinking error, you counteract it. So if it's something negative about you, you counteract it with something positive about you that's true to the situation, that centers more on the reality, not the distortion. And then you practice repeating it. You have to keep saying it over and over and over again. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can put Post-its all over the place. You can set reminders. You can spend 10 minutes before you go to bed at night and just, imagine yourself in these situations and practice repeating these statements. You can do what's known as object association, where if you see something, like if you take an item, you pair it with a thought. So let's see what I have on my desk here. I've got this rainbow here, right? So if I am trying to remind myself to be more positive, and I have this mantra of something that I need to tell myself to reinforce that's positive, I might take this object and practice saying that statement over and over again while looking at the object. That way, now every time I see this rainbow, it's going to remind me, oh, this positive mantra. So it's helping you to recall. And you can get really creative with it too. You could even make phone wallpapers or something. You could make a desktop wallpaper. You could put things anywhere. You could do whatever it is that works best for you. And you know what works best for you. If you're a more visual person, if you need some type of audio, if you need something just to hold, something that's sensory, a certain object that feels nice to you or is comforting. So again, you can pair those with those positive statements that you need to reinforce. And what you can do is also reinforce the fact that you're capable of reinforcing, because again, you've already demonstrated that capability. So don't doubt yourself. You can do this. So that is my my bit on monologue of the mind. It's unfortunately it's pretty general. There is a lot more that goes into it. So I would encourage you to really research some more thinking errors, because it'll allow you to kind of break this stuff down further once you start to get a better idea of it. But since this can be a difficult process and it can get frustrating, I would say just start with this basic list. Just go through this and try to work on that, put those thoughts on trial, work on the thought replacement, and see how it goes. And as you progress and once you start to get into a flow of things, you can start to explore other thinking errors, because you could Google it. I mean, the list is tremendous. There's so many things. And they do also tie in with defense mechanisms. There's a lot of overlap there too. So yeah, but that's it. For the rest of the hour, I'm going to be taking questions. So you can send me a private message just to the side. I'm not sure which side it's going to appear on based on how this is set up. But yes, on the side, there's a little dialogue box. So you can type in a question to me and I will answer it right here live. But again, I thank you for joining me on this webinar today. And feel free to check out our other webinars, which are at www.firstlightpsych.com.